All right, fantastic. Thank you very much. Enjoying the conference so far. And thank you to everyone who is tuning in at the moment. I'm really glad you've done that. I'll introduce myself. My name's Steve, and I work at Microsoft. I'm a developer or architect on the .NET team, particularly focusing on web stuff and with a bit of a special focus on Blazor, which is good because that's what we're going to talk about today. Now, if you've been watching the last few sessions, you'll already be familiar with where we are in the history of .NET at the moment. But just in case anyone is just watching this session, I want to make sure you know where we are on the timeline. So .NET does a major release every year in November. You may well know that. And so what has the Blazor team been doing for the last 12 months since the .NET 6 release? Well, we spent about half of our time working on .NET MAUI. So that's the new Blazor hybrid feature that allows you to run your Blazor components within a native mobile or desktop application. And you may have just seen some of Dan showing you that. And then for the other 6 months, we worked on adding some great new features to Blazor in .NET 7, which I'll show you. Now, of course, there is going to be another .NET release next November, .NET 8, and we've started planning that already. We would really love any feedback that you've got of what things you would like to see in .NET 8. So if you can get onto the GitHub repo and give us some of your suggestions, we'll hopefully get some of those into the product next year. But this talk right now is about where we are today with .NET 7. So we've got a lot of great new features for Blazor developers in .NET 7, and most of them work across all the different Blazor hosting models. So whether you're using Blazor Server or WebAssembly or hybrid with .NET MAUI, most of these features will work in the same way across all of them. Now, there are also some WebAssembly specific features. Mostly those were implemented by the underlying .NET runtime team, so thank you to them for doing that. And I'll mention a few of those towards the end of this talk, but there is a whole talk about that tomorrow where you can get into more details about WebAssembly runtime stuff. Let's think now about some of the new Blazor features that work on all the hosting models, and I'm going to demonstrate them to you. So we're going to need a bit of a demo app to get started with. So let's just switch over to this sample application that I've put together. It doesn't use any .NET 7 features yet, but we're going to add some. And this is not meant to be a sort of surprising or clever sample. This is meant to be as mainstream and predictable as possible so that you can easily relate to it. So if I start this up in my browser, you will see that this is simply displaying a list of products, which is getting from a database. And if I click on one of these links, I get into an edit screen, and it does all the normal editing stuff. So I can make some changes to, let's say, this category. It tracks the changes there. If I try to save, it's going to do validation. And if I satisfy the validation rules, then it can tell me that the changes have been saved and I could go back. So pretty straightforward stuff. And if we look at the code in there, what we'll find is that this is a Blazor server application. Could be done with WebAssembly, but I just happen to have done it with server on this occasion. And if we look in there, here's an example of one of the pages. This is the index page, and it doesn't really do very much apart from just display this products list. And if we go into the code for that, this is a typical way of fetching data from a database and rendering it with Blazor Server. So this is using Entity Framework, which is why we've got this DB context there. And I'm to the life of this component. And what that means is whenever this component is on the screen, this DB context will keep going. And if the user navigates away, then it will get disposed and cleaned up. And apart from that, it just uses normal EF code. So we're getting our products. We're saying we don't need to do any change tracking because this is not an edit screen, so it's more efficient not to. I'm limiting it just to 50 because otherwise there'll be too many. We'll fix that in a minute. And then to display them, we simply have a for each loop to render these links for each of them. All right, so that's normal .NET 6 code, but can we make it a bit better? Instead of just displaying a list of names, can we display more information at once? And can we get around this limitation where it only just shows us 50 items? Can we show a lot more? So that brings us to the first thing I want to show you. Quick Grid. Now, this is actually marked as preview in .NET 7. That's not because it's not ready for production use. It's because we're not technically counting it as supported because we want to be able to change the API depending on feedback from the community. But if you're good with the API as it is, then you can use this like any other open source project. And the idea of it is it's not that it's intended to replace every other grid in the entire Blazor ecosystem. There are existing other ones, many of which have more functionality. But the idea with Quick Grid is to give you a standard basic set of features that will cover many common scenarios and that it will perform extremely well in all the different situations you might use it, whether it's WebAssembly server or with a large amount of data or whatever, should work well. So let's have a go. I'm going to go over there and change this screen so it works using Quick Grid. And what we notice, firstly, is that our code gets a lot simpler. All we have to do now is we get our products from Entity Framework there. I'm still limiting it to 50, but we'll change that in a second. So we've got this queryable of products, and we can pass that to Quick Grid, and it's going to render them for us. Now, I haven't got any columns in this grid just yet. So when I switch back to my UI, we should see that it becomes blank because there's no columns for it to render. So let's go and add some. There's two types of built-in columns. We've got property columns like these ones, which just pick out a certain property in a strongly typed way to render, and we can pass other parameters too. And then there's template columns for more control over the rendering, and I'll show you that in a minute. But now we've got these 4 property columns. When I switch back, you'll see we've got this nice little grid. We can scroll around. We can do sorting because I set sortable to be true. So that's good. But I want to get beyond this limitation of only showing 50 items. Quick Grid has got the ability to do both pagination and virtualization so that you can work with much larger amounts of data. And to do that, we will first add an instance of this model type, pagination state, and I'm going to set it to have 10 items per page. And that will keep track of where we are in the pages. And I'm going to pass this in to the grid. So once that has access to that, it will respect the pagination rules. And then we need a bit of UI to let the user move between pages. You could write your own UI for that, but I'm going to use a built-in one, which is simply called Paginator. And once I've done that, if I go back into my browser, we should see now it's displaying those 10 items, and I can switch through these pages quite easily. That's good. But I don't want to limit it to 50 anymore. Now we've got pagination. I'm going to remove that take 50 from the end. And then when I come back and I'll reload on that, we've now got 100,000 items from our database, and we can very easily continue working with all that data. Now, it's not super easy, actually, because there's so much stuff, the user hasn't got much chance of actually finding what they're looking for. So we're going to need to add a search feature in just a minute. But before we get to that, let's fix the display slightly, because some of the styling is quite weird, especially these prices. Like, I've no idea how you're supposed to even read that. It doesn't look like a price. So I'm going to drop in a slightly updated version of this code, which uses some template columns as well to do things like custom formatting of the price, setting alignment, custom sorting rules, and I've got a link into the editor screen again. So with those updates in place, now things look a little bit better. That is the Quick Grid, which is available as preview with .NET 7. Let's move on to the next new feature, bind enhancements. Now, Blazor has always supported data binding from the very beginning, but we've added some new powerful ways of binding in additional ways to give you some more flexible options in .NET 7. And to have a scenario for that, let's imagine that we want to add a search UI to this screen right now, so you can quickly find your particular product. So we'll get started doing it. Until we run into a problem, we need a new feature. So the first thing we're going to need is a place to keep track of whatever it is that the user is searching for. So I'm having this string field here. And then I need to add a bit of UI to let the user type in what they want to search for. And I'm going to use a Quick Grid feature called column options, where we can type in whatever UI we want that's associated with a particular column. And what it will do with that is it will render a little icon in the column header. You can control what that is. And when the user clicks that, they'll get the UI that you chose. And inside there, I'm going to put a box that they can type their search terms into. And I'll use the normal data binding that precedes .NET 7 that's always been available. So I'm binding this text box here to the search name. I've got a few other attributes, and I'm saying I want it to update whenever there's an input event. That means every keystroke. The browser fires an input event on every keystroke or paste or anything else that changes the contents of the text box. All right, so hopefully that's enough to make some actual UI appear, even though it doesn't use any new features yet. And when I type in there, it does update that field, but it's not updating my search query. What I really need to do is somehow, every time this binding fires, I need to update the filter. But how do I do that? Prior to .NET 7, it wasn't very easy. You had to do some pretty weird tricks to react when a binding changes. But one of the cool new features in .NET 7 is something called bind after. It's very easy. It simply means every time that binding updates, we are going to call your function or your method, and you can do whatever you want in there, whether it's synchronous, asynchronous, whatever. And if you need slightly more control, we've got a more advanced version of it called bind get and bind set, which gives you ability to do custom logic both before and after on both sides of the binding if you want to do any conversions. So anyway, let's use bind after. And I'm going to say that after the binding updates, I want to update the filter. And I haven't defined that yet. So let's put in an implementation of that. And here's my implementation. It's just going to use Entity Framework APIs to add a where clause based on the search name that you've entered. I can also slightly simplify on initialize now to just call update filter. All right, so if that works, then when we come back here, every time this binding updates, you will see it calls our update method, and then we can automatically update our query. All right, so we've got working search, and within that search, things like paging and sorting will still work. So that's nice. All right, next new feature. A pair of related features, in fact. The community has been asking for this for quite a long time. It's one of the most highly demanded features, and it's the ability to receive a notification before the user navigates and have the power to do things with it, such as cancel the navigation. So we've added this new event called location changing that tells you when the user's navigating. And in case you want to use that with an editing scenario, we've added this special flavor of it called navigation lock, which is a component that you can use if you want to help the user so that they don't lose any changes if they try to navigate away while they're in the middle of editing. So navigation lock is just a particular usage pattern for the underlying location changing event. And I'm going to show you it because otherwise it's not going to be very clear what I'm talking about. So let's go to one of these edit screens here. And we're going to go into edit this product, and I'm going to change the name changed like that. And I'm going to maybe change the stock a little bit as well. Now imagine that as a user, I forget to save my changes. I don't remember to press this save button. I just click this link to go back to home. Well, what will happen is I just lose my changes, which is not very good. Another thing that could happen is what if I leave the site entirely? Again, I might lose my changes. So to show you, I'm going to go to an unrelated website, Microsoft.com. And then when I go back in here and I start making an edit, edited again, like that. At this point, I could use the back to go all the way back to Microsoft, and it won't do anything. It will just lose my changes. So let's see if we can stop this problem from occurring. I'm going to go into the code for this edit screen here. Now, I know there's quite a lot of code here. You won't have time to read it all. Don't worry about it. This is just the normal way to do editing with Blazor and has been for a long time. We've got this edit form. We've got a context which will keep track of the edits. We've got a thing that activates validation, and we've got various components for displaying the UI, for editing the data, and for showing validation messages. But that's not new. I want to show a new thing, so I'm going to show you the navigation lock component. And this deals with two different types of navigation: external navigation and internal. And the reason for the distinction is because the browser forces you to make this distinction. External navigations are if the user is leaving your site completely, using the back button or following a link or closing the browser. And the browser will not let you stop the user from doing that, but it does let you ask them to confirm it. So that's what this is doing. It's saying if you're doing an external navigation and you've got some unsaved changes, then we'll ask the user to confirm it. So let's see if that works, shall we? I'm going to go back over here and reload. All right, and now I'm going to go and start making an edit. I'll say edited again, like that. And I'm going to try and go back to Microsoft.com again. And this time you'll see we get a little message that shows up. The browser won't let you customize this message, but it does let you ask the user to confirm it. So the user could cancel if they want to. And similarly, if they were going to close the tab, it will show you them the confirmation, or even if they were going to close the entire browser, they'll get that confirmation prompt as well. Of course, they can choose to go ahead with it if they want. Now, the other scenario is internal navigation. That's when the user just moves to a different part of your site. And in that case, there's no limitations. You can do anything you want. There, the browser won't stop you. So we've got this different callback that will occur for internal navigations. And you can put custom logic in there. It can even do async things. So you could force the user to save their changes automatically at that point, or you could just always unilaterally cancel it. It's up to you. But what I'm doing in this case, just to show you, is I'm adding a confirm prompt that's kind of similar to the other one. And if the user doesn't confirm it, we will prevent the navigation. So let's see if that works, shall we? I'll come back over here and I'll reload, and I will confirm the external navigation, because reload is an external navigation. I'll make a change. For example, I'll change this stock count, and then I'll try to click on the index link. That's an internal navigation, so it will run my custom logic and it will ask for confirmation, and I'll cancel it. And just to show you, if I do save the change first, then when I click the link this time, it's not going to show any confirmation prompt. So there you go. That's how you can use navigation lock, which builds on top of the location changing event to give you a nice pattern when you work with editing data. Let's move on. Next new feature, custom elements. Now, if you watched the previous session, you will have seen an example of this where Dan showed how you can use custom elements to host Blazor components inside an Angular application. And I'm going to show you this in a slightly different way just now. So if you don't know, if you didn't watch the previous session, what this does is it allows you to say that Blazor components will be registered as custom elements, and that lets you use them from other web technologies. So if you're doing some other client-side rendering, whether it's with something like React or Angular, Vue or Svelte or anything else like that, you can have those other technologies render Blazor components. And similarly, if you're doing server-side rendering with Rails or PHP or anything else, then again, you can get those technologies to render your Blazor components. So to show you that, and just to have a bit of a change from Angular or React, I'm going to use a server rendering technology. Let's imagine we want to integrate this products manager with a WordPress site. Now, I know WordPress is not exactly hot new stuff, but it is very mainstream. So that's why I'm going to show it to you. And obviously, it doesn't know anything about .NET, which is nice because we can show that it still works anyway. So I've got this WordPress site right here. You know it's WordPress because it tells you that. And I've got a page on it called All Products. And I want to show my Blazor products grid right here. Now, the way that you can do that is you need to host both your Blazor code and your WordPress, in this case, code on the same domain. It's not intended for cross-domain hosting scenarios. Maybe we'll add something for that in the future, but that's not the case right now. In this case, I have got my Blazor server application and my WordPress site running on the same host, so I can make them work together. And what I do is I go into whatever you use to configure your other technology, and you make it render the script tag that loads Blazor. So in this case, it's Blazor Server. It would also work with Blazor WebAssembly. In fact, it's slightly easier to do it with that. So I'm loading that into my WordPress site. I'm also adding some CSS just because I want the styling to match up. And I've got this base tag so that links will also work. And once you've done that, you can go and start using your Blazor components. So in this case, in my Blazor code, I have said I want to register a custom element, and it's going to be the products list, and I'm giving it the name products-list. And since I'm loading the Blazor script into WordPress, I can now use that in my pages here. So inside all products, this is where it says to do show products grid, and I'm going to add a products list right there. So I'll hit save on that. And then when we go back to that page, you'll see we've now got our list of products rendering inside the WordPress application. And of course, it's got all the same functionality that you'd expect. It's got sorting, it's got all the searching, and it's got pagination. And it's partially integrated the styling as well for me, because I've got both WordPress CSS and Blazor CSS loaded together here. So they're kind of working together to control the final styling. So that's nice. But one other thing we could do is pass parameters as well. Let's say we want to have a page here called batteries that just displays batteries. At the moment, it displays everything, even though it's trying to just display batteries. So let me show you how it's trying. If I go to the editor here, you can see it's trying to pass a category and a subcategory into my Blazor code. But the Blazor code doesn't know anything about these parameters, so it's just ignoring that right now. But we can make it know about those parameters, and then it will work. So I'll go into my products list component, and I can use normal Blazor parameters. For example, here I'm adding category and subcategory parameters, and then I will change my filter logic so that it respects those parameters and adds extra where clauses for them. So here we go. We'll say if you've given us a category, we'll add a where clause for that, and similarly for the subcategory. And now we've added that feature. If I go back to this page and reload it, you'll see that the batteries screen now just shows batteries, and all products shows all products. So there we go. The point of that is simply that we can integrate Blazor, whether it's server or WebAssembly, with other web technologies, whether they're client-side rendered or server-side rendered, which may be very useful in many of your scenarios. Okay, so let's move on now, and we'll talk a little bit about Blazor WebAssembly and a couple of the new features that have been added there, starting with loading progress. Now, hopefully your Blazor WebAssembly app loads nice and quick, but it's always possible that some users will be on slow network connections and they might be waiting a little while for it to load. So it's kind of nice if you would show them the progress as it goes. So that is something we've now baked in by default. I'll show you the updated Blazor WebAssembly project template. So I'm just setting that as startup. I haven't changed this template in any way. This is just how it comes out of the box. And if you were very fast, you might have seen the loading indicator show up. It's a bit too fast to really see. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in my browser DevTools and I'm going to throttle the network to be extra slow. So it's going to load super slow, and I'm going to clear my browser cache. So it's definitely loading everything. And when I reload now, because it's throttled, it will take a while. And you can see that it's updating this progress as it goes. So the user's got a sense of how long they have to wait. Now it's styled in this circular way right now, which we thought looked nice, but of course it's designed for you to customize and change in any way that you want to. All you have to do is go to the place in your index.html where that markup exists, and you can change it. So by default, we're rendering this SVG that renders a couple of circles to display, and I'll show you how it works in terms of getting the loading progress dynamically in a second. But to do that, I want to show it to you in the context of another thing, which is the new empty template. And we've added this for both Blazor Server and WebAssembly. And the idea of this is, after you've made a few Blazor sites, you probably don't really need to see any more counters and fetch data screens. You might have had enough of those by now. Quite a few people said they wanted a more empty template, so we've added that. And I'll show you what that looks like. And it's not completely empty. It's got some of the things that you need functionally to make your application work. But when it comes up, you'll see all it actually renders is just the word hello world. And if we look at the sources in that, you'll see there's only one page in there, and inside there, it simply displays hello world. So it's a slightly nicer starting point. And we've also simplified the CSS as well. So it doesn't have Bootstrap by default. The only CSS that it's got in there is 32 lines, and it's one thing that's to do with accessibility, and all the rest of it is just to do with how the error messages are styled if you have an unhandled error. That's just because if your error messages don't show up, it's kind of difficult to do your development. So we've added some default styling for that, but everything else is there for you to sort out yourself. All right. Now, I want to show you how we can set some custom loading progress in the context of this empty template. So I'm going to go here in my index.html to where the loading message is displayed. And let's just check that we can see it's loading. So I'm going to, once again, make sure that my network is throttled, and I will clear the site data so that it's going to go very, very slow. And now you'll see the word loading stays on the screen for quite a while. Let's customize it, shall we? What I'm going to do is I don't want a circular progress bar this time. Just to show you we can do other things, I'm going to add a linear progress bar. And it's quite easy to do. I'm going to add a single div with this custom class called linear progress. And then I'm going to add a bit of CSS to control how that renders. So my CSS is going to look like this. I'm going to say it's got a silver background, it's got a particular height, a particular width, and that's all I'm saying about that at the moment. Also, I want to render another element next to it or inside it, which is going to be blue. And I'm going to set this to be 30% of the width of its parent. And I've got some other stuff to do with animation as well. All right, so that's not really going to show the load progress because it's hard-coded to 30%. But let's just check how it displays. When I reload, you'll see, oh, I need to clear my cache again if we want it to really be there. Okay, you'll see it's now showing that 30% value. And if we want it to show the real load in progress, we can simply use a CSS variable, which is now built in. It's called Blazor load percentage, and Blazor will automatically change that dynamically to match the current load percentage. So if I go back and clear my site data one more time and reload, then this time you'll see that that progress bar is dynamically updating to show the actual load progress. And it's very slow because of what I've done in the network tools, but it is actually working. All right, so that is the empty template and loading progress. Now, there's other WebAssembly specific features too, which you can find in other talks in this conference. One of them is some enhancements to how authentication works, some new extensibility points that allow you to run some extra logic before and after auth so that you can pass some additional parameters to your authentication provider if you want to control a little bit more about how the auth works. And then there's also some big improvements to the underlying runtime in terms of its performance. So we've made AOT quite a lot faster. I don't have specific numbers, but in some of my experimental benchmarking, I've been getting apps that have been almost twice as fast with .NET 7 AOT as they were with .NET 6 AOT. Not promising it's always going to be that much of a multiple, but I'm just saying it can be quite a bit faster. And we've also got now support for vectorization or SIMD. Now, that's a little bit advanced. That's generally used with numerical algorithms. And what it means is that even on a single thread, your CPU can process multiple streams of data simultaneously. You do have to change your algorithm to make it use these new, the SIMD APIs, but that is now supported on WebAssembly. It's been supported in regular .NET for quite a few years, but it's also now ready to go with your WebAssembly code. And then finally, quite excitingly, we have got an alpha level preview of real multi-threading for Blazor WebAssembly. This is not something that we expect you to actually use in production. In fact, it can't even be used out of the box in Blazor WebAssembly. We're going to add that shortly. But if you're using .NET on WebAssembly, there is the opportunity for you to try out .NET 8 multi-threading now, so you can get a sense of what works, what doesn't, give us some feedback. This absolutely isn't intended for production use just yet, but it gives you a sense of where we're going. And you can find out more about Blazor WebAssembly runtime features tomorrow in a talk that is all about it. Okay, so that is all we've got time for in this session. If you want to learn some more, you can go to the URLs that you see on your screen right now for an overview of all the ASP.NET Core features, including Blazor ones. And if you want this Products Manager sample that I've shown you just now, then you can go to the URL there and get that and try that out yourself. So there we go. That's all I've got time for, and I will hand you back. And I hope you have a great rest of the conference.